The Chair would like to acknowledge the virtual presence of the Senate Minority Leader, Franklin Drilon. Morning, sir.
Good morning,
Earlier,
Mr. Chairman.
earlier, Senator Sherwin Gatchalian also signified to log in. Now, from the Department of National Defense, virtually attending are the following: Undersecretary Ding Luna, Undersecretary Arnel Duco, Undersecretary Reynaldo Mapago, Undersecretary or Assistant Secretary Antonio Bautista, Assistant Secretary Josue Gabersa Jr. From the DILG, also attending virtually, Assistant Secretary Esther Aldana, Attorney Gina Wenceslao. From the Department of Justice, also attending virtually, Attorney Norelisa Manlangit. From the Department of Budget and Management, Director Mary Ann De La Vega, Ms. Mary Rose Aguilar, also present virtually. From the Department of Finance, Undersecretary Elsa Agustin, Director Valerie Joy Brion. From the Armed Forces of the Philippines, Brigadier General Reno Tolentino, Philippine Army, Brigadier General Serme Ayuyao, Philippine Army, Brigadier General Raleigh Mojica, Philippine Army, Captain Vincent Sibala, Philippine Navy, Colonel Ahmad Omar Jr., Philippine Air Force. Also in attendance, Police Brigadier General Melesio Nartates Jr. From the Philippine National Police, Brigadier General Arthur Cabalona, Police Major General Rolando Hinanay, Police Lieutenant Colonel Donna Villarreal, Police Lieutenant Colonel Dornave Calderon, Police Lieutenant Colonel Jill Eshil Diep. From the PNP Retirement and Benefits Administration, or PRBS, Police Brigadier General Sidney Hernia. From the Philippine Coast Guard, Vice Admiral Oscar Endona Jr., Captain Fedelin Santos, Captain Vivian J. K., Commander Laila Tatel, Lieutenant Commander Lovely Rose Katayan. From the BJMP, Jail Chief Superintendent Rebecca Pawid, Jail Chief Superintendent Rinco Montaus, Jail Chief Superintendent Clint Russell Tangeres, Jail Senior Superintendent Filipinas Fulgencio. Also in attendance is the Bureau of Jail and Management Director Alan Suliano Iral. From the Bureau of Fire Protection, Chief Superintendent Jesus Fernandez, Chief Inspector April Rosan Malyari. From the NAMRIA, Commander Carter Luma Ang, Lieutenant Commander Lorena Jasmine Lerio. From the GSIS, Assistant Chief Legal Counsel, Attorney Lucio Yu Jr., Attorney Giovanni Lin Kikoy Marin, Mr. Jeffrey Reyes, Ms. Johnny Lynn Racoma. From the Treasurer, from the National Treasury, Director Rosalia V. De Leon, together with Mr. Carlo Vispo, Jose Carlos Sebastian. Yes, this is the fourth and hopefully the final hearing of our proposed measure on the military and uniformed personnel pension reform. As reiterated by our fiscal managers, we are pressed for time. The passage of the MUP pension bill or pension reform bill is earnestly and urgently sought so as not to create any fiscal risks that may compromise the state's ability to fund both the MUP pensions and a credible defense posture. All of us here would agree that our shared objective is plain and simple. We must have a clear policy direction to guarantee that the pension requirement is sustainable for the next 100 years. Nonetheless, we must be grounded in reality that our fiscal capacity is limited, while at the same time be very certain that we will not shortchange the welfare and interests of our uniformed retirees. Yet, the devil is in the details, so to speak. To keep everyone abreast of the many developments on the matter, let me lay down the following. 1. The ad hoc committee on the military and uniformed personnel pension system recently submitted for consideration of the plenary of the House of Representatives Committee Report number 1061. The fiscal improvements under said report are primarily derived from capping the growth salaries of active personnel to a maximum of 5% at any given year for the next 10 years. 2. The GSIS released the new actuarial study dated September 13, 2021, which caps the salary increase by 5% with automatic indexation for both existing members and pensioners and new entrants. The base case scenario at 7% interest rate fell to 5.7 trillion pesos from the previous 9.6 trillion pesos. Further, if a mandatory contribution scheme is adopted, the total funding requirements will be reduced to up to 4.4 trillion pesos. Third, last Monday, the Senate passed on third reading Senate Bill number 2376. Under Section 8 of that bill, officers and enlisted personnel of the AFP shall be retired one rank higher, but will only be entitled to retirement benefits of the permanent rank last held. The removal of entitlement to the benefits of a higher rank for new entrants, if applied to all new entrants of the various MUPs, will reduce the funding requirement from the base case or base scenario of 5.7 trillion pesos to around 5.5 trillion pesos, or a difference of around 225 billion pesos. The bill also provides for changes in the retirement age of officers in the military from 56 to 59 years old or 30 years of active duty, whichever comes earlier. Nonetheless, the actuarial study indicates that changing the retirement age from 56 to 60, not 59, provides no substantial addition to the funding requirements, registering a mere 0.58% increase. Fourth and finally, considering the position of the majority, if not all, of the concerned agencies, that determination of the automatic indexation of all financial reforms should only cover new entrants. The GSIS study showed that the requirement will fall from 5.7 trillion to 2.99 trillion, though still higher than the 1.356 trillion pesos if the reforms are to be applied to all. While this representation refuses to drown you with numbers, much remains to be discussed in today's hearing. With that, let us begin. Is the GSIS ready to present? For the benefit of those who were not present when you presented to our office your latest actuarial study, ma'am, the National Treasurer.
Good morning to all the members of the Senate Committee on National Defense. Yes, Mr. Chairperson, the GSIS is ready to present, and Mr. SVP George Onqueco will be doing the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. This is George Onqueco, sir, from GSIS. May I request my colleague, Joni Lin, to share the slides.
Kindly speak louder.
Good afternoon, morning, Mr. Chair. This is George from GSIS.
Can you remove your mask so you can easily be understood, or you cannot?
Let me just check the system, sir.
Okay. Yeah, we can hear you actually, but Senator De Leon seems to find difficulty in hearing you.
Okay,
Yes, please proceed.
Good afternoon. Good morning, Mr. Chair, senators, and research persons. We'll be presenting the study of GSIS in a compact form. May I ask, Mr. Chair, if I'm a bit clearer right now?
Yes, yes. Senator De Leon, can you hear the speaker loud? Okay, please go ahead. Loud and
Okay.
clear now.
Next slide, please. The slide we see here is the gist of our study. This is as of December 2019, and the amounts are in trillions. There are three cases that were considered. The left column shows the salary increase for case 1, 2, and 3 are 10, 10, and 5%. 5% being the base case we see over here, because it was based on the House bill, the recently passed House bill. Now, the next three columns you see over here, Mr. Chair, are for existing members of the MUP, pensioners, one column, active members, the next, and then total. Now, the red column you see, the next red column is the new entrants. It is 0 for the first two cases, because for the first two cases, it was based on a closed group valuation, meaning no new entrants. With the request of Senator Lacson to include new entrants, that's base case 3. We see there 2.71 trillion. If we add for base 3, if we add the total for existing and new entrant, you get 5.71 trillion. And this is based on an open group valuation. So this is our base case, 2.71 trillion. This is again based on December 2019 data. And this assumes that there's a one-time funding, but of course, in the later slides, we'll show the amortization across the years. We understand that 5.71 trillion is still a huge number. So we did sensitivities as requested. We varied certain assumptions for the consumption of the committee to understand how certain assumptions affect the figures. So next slide, please. This slide shows the sensitivities as regards the interest rate or the discount rate for the fund. What we used right now was a 7% scenario whereby the fund, assuming it will earn 7% when it is launched. You see the base case scenario is now highlighted in yellow. The 7% will have for pensioners, that's 1.47 trillion, 1.53 for active, for a total of 3 trillion, and new entrants of 2.71, which again will yield us 5.71 trillion. If you look at the rows, Mr. Chair and dear colleagues, as we decrease the interest rate or the yield of the fund, the liability will start to increase. So from 7% at 5.71, if we go to 6%, it will increase to 8.29 trillion. And the reverse is true if we increase the interest rate from 7% to 8%, the 5.71 trillion obligation now becomes only 3.8. So there's an inverse relation between the interest rate assumed versus the liability. And it's very sensitive actually to the assumptions being because the retirement scheme is a long-term one, similar to insurance. Next slide, please. On this slide, Mr. Chair, we are varying the salary rate increase. The base case, as shown on the leftmost column, that's 5%. That's the salary rate assumption. This time, if we increase the salary rate, of course, the retirement obligation will also increase. So as expected, when we increase the salary rate from 5% to say 6%, which is the next row, we move from 5.71 trillion total funding requirement all the way to 8.15. So that's about a 42% increase just by a 1 percentage point increase in the salary rate assumption. So again, these are the effects of the two assumptions. The interest rate is inversely related to the liability, but the salary rate is directly related. In all of these figures, Mr. Chair, they do not include the accumulated pension arrears owed to pensioners. And the assumption here is that there's a one-time funding. And in the later slide, we'll show the amortization schedule. Next slide, please. In this slide, we show the differences in terms of the base case scenario plus certain adjustments along the way in terms of benefits. So what we see in the table here right now, the one in yellow, the row in yellow, you have a base scenario, total estimated funding of 5.71. If this is amortized without employee-employer contributions to MUP, Mr. Chair, under 20 years, the amortization is 0.504 trillion per year, but if it's 40 years, it goes down to 0.401 trillion per year. Now, in scenario 2, for automatic indexation, if there is no automatic indexation, the 5.71 will move to 3.43 trillion. The assumption here is that existing pensioners, active military personnel, and even new entrants from henceforth will no longer have automatic indexation. So that will significantly drop the liability. Now, in terms of number 3, if actual rank were used, the 5.71 trillion base case will now move to 5.35. So there's a slight relief. And in number 4, scenario 4, for maximum amount of pension, if it were set to 90%, there is a slight bump up from 5.71 to 5.72. And the reason for the slight increase is because for AFP, the maximum is 85% retirement percentage, but for AFP, it's 90%. So if we assume everyone to be at 90, there's a slight bump in terms of the obligation. And if number 5, the age at retirement of 60, we assume instead of 56, it's 60, there will be a slight increase in the obligation from 5.71 base case to 5.75. Kindly note here, Mr. Chair, that for the age at 60 scenario, still it is allowed here that the members or personnel will still retire at service year 20. On the other hand, in number 6, Mr. Chair, if minimum pensionable age of 56 were to be used instead of allowing 20 years of service to a personnel to already retire, the liability from 5.71 will drop to 4.79. And if we combine scenarios 2 to 6, Mr. Chair, meaning all of the reforms were included, the 5.71 will significantly drop to 3.03 trillion, or a 2.68 trillion decrease. And further, Mr. Chair, in scenario 8 is combining scenario 7, which is essentially all of the reforms, and including a 21% contribution for base and long pay for existing and the new entrants. The 5.71 trillion base case will significantly drop to 1.36 trillion, Mr. Chair. This is for the reforms for both existing members, pensioners, and new entrants. The following slide, Mr. Chair, the reforms will only apply to new entrants as requested. Next slide, please. So as you see on the left side, there's an indicator there that the reforms will only apply to new entrants. So if we combine all of these things, Mr. Chair, from 2 to 7, and just zone in on scenario 8, the liability will now be 2.69 if the reforms were only for new personnel. But for scenario 8, the 21%, Mr. Chair, contribution applies to new entrants and existing as well. So it's a 2.69 trillion. Next slide, please. Next slide. So there are other slides, Mr. Chair, if you want to discuss the data. But essentially, Mr. Chair, what we presented are the gist of the report in terms of results.
Yes, please go ahead. These are important data that the members of the committee would like to be informed of.
Noted, Mr. Chair. For the data, we used the December 2019 data that was provided to GSIS. In terms of active members, there are 402,000 active members from the different MUP agencies. The average age is 35, and the average years of service is 10 years. The average compensation, base and long pay, amounts to close to 40,000 or 39,687. On the bottom part of the slide, we see a table there. This time it's for pensioners. There are about 148,000 regular pensioners, Those are old age and disability pensioners, but there are survivorship pensioners, about two-thirds of the regular pension at about 93,000. The average attained age for regular pensioners is 63, and that's the same for their survivorship pension. On the other hand, the average monthly pension for regular pensioners is already 43,000. And for survivorship pension, it's about 24,000, which is as expected because for survivorship pensioner, we only get 50% of the regular pension. So these are the data that we have used. Next slide, please. We were also requested by the Office of the Chair to project the new entrants, and these were what we use in terms of projecting the new entrants across the different agencies. We use the authorized number of personnel and population. So these are the assumptions in terms of new entrants for the next 10 years. Next slide, please. In terms of the key assumptions that we used, we start with the first row for benefits. It is based on the existing retirement schemes of AFP and PNP. And for conservatism, BFP, BJMP, TCG, NAMRIA, and Bucor benefits were set to PNP benefits because they're a bit higher than the AFP benefits, so we earned on the conservative side. The contribution, there was no contribution used because for the base case, there was no contribution, but there was a sensitivity on the 21%. The decrement rates are the same rates that we have used for the past. These are the probability tables. For the salary increase, the base case is 5%, consistent with the recently passed House bill, and the interest rate is 7% per annum, but we have shown the different sensitivities as regards these two very sensitive assumptions. For pension increase, there's automatic indexation assumption, and for pension eligibility, it's at 20 years of service. And we also assume the retirement at next higher rank, and the pension base is the final salary, and it was based on an open group approach, meaning new entrants were considered, Mr. Chair. Next slide, please. The methodology that was employed, the annual projected benefits and contributions for existing active and pensioners, as well as new entrants, are calculated or an open group approach. The projection is for 100 years. To compute the total funding requirement, the present value of annual projected benefit less the projected annual contributions of any are computed. And then the amortization schedule, as requested by the chair, we've already imputed it in the prior slides. I think this is the last slide, Mr. Chair. Thank you po.
Thank you, George. Yes, before we proceed, the chair would like to acknowledge the presence of Senator Sherwin. Are you there? Ikaw nga yan. Welcome, Senator Sherwin Gatchalian, also in attendance. Also, the chair would like to acknowledge the virtual presence of Vice Admiral Ariston de los Reyes, retired, who just logged in. Yes, we invited him because he's one who continues to tenaciously pursue to protect the rights and interests of the retirees. So he represents here the biggest chunk of the stakeholders. So welcome, Mr. Welcome. We'd like to hear your side on this regarding all these sensitivity scenarios. Now, before I recognize the minority leader or Senator Sherwin, a couple of questions from the chair. Notwithstanding the measures now pending in both houses, what is the final fiscal reform policy of our fiscal managers in terms of new entrants, the rate of salary increase, eligibility for automatic indexation, rank at retirement, pensionable age, at saka yung mandatory contributions? I ask this question because in a letter sent by the Secretary of Finance to the Senate President, dated, I think, August 23, last month, it seems that the fiscal managers have already abandoned most of the reforms they advocated and settled on the cap of 5% increase on the salary of those in the active service. So parang yun na lang parang inabandon yun na lahat. We'd like to hear from DOF and DBM If this is so, DOF and DBM. Kasi kung ito na lang yung final fiscal policy reform, wala na tayo masyado pag-uusapan siguro. So, we'd like to hear from you. Yes,
Good
anybody
morning.
from the Department of Finance?
Good morning, Mr. Chair.
Good morning.
This is,
Yes.
This is Elsa Agustin. As regards your question, may I be allowed to refer it to the National Treasurer, Leia, because she has been assigned by Secretary Dominguez to lead the Department of Finance on this reform.
Okay,
Thank
sige,
you,
Leah,
Yes.
you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. In that letter, what we have been working on now is the House Committee report, which capped the salary increase to 5% because, Mr. Chair, as we saw in the analysis, it's really the increase in the salary of the MUP personnel that's also providing significant burden to the appropriations for the pension. But if we cap it at 5%, then we will significantly also reduce in terms of the unfunded liabilities from the earlier estimate of 9.6 trillion to about 5.7 trillion pesos, Mr. Chair. And I think also when we had the discussions in the House together with the MEP personnel, there was also a consensus, and also in the memo to the President, we have also been able to get the commitment from the heads of the different MUP agencies to support the House version that would limit the increase to 5%. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson.
Thank you. So effectively, that would be the House version. That's the only reform that will be introduced under the House version.
That's correct.
The salary cap of 5% per annum in the next 10 years.
Yes, that's correct. And of course, the other reforms that would include the establishment of the MEP Trust Fund that would manage the funds to ensure the fiscal sustainability, and also which would include membership from the different MUP agencies.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Senator Drilon, would you like to be clarified on some issues?
Yes, first of all, this will be a funded retirement plan under the GSIS, just to clarify, ma'am. The assumption is that this will be a funded plan and transferred to the GSIS.
Mr. Chairperson, is this on the House version? That's the
Yes, the House version, the House version.
That's right. So the GSIS will be appointed as the manager of the fund, Mr. Senator Drilon.
So as the chairman pointed out, the only reform introduced is the 5% cap on salary increases.
Yes, but there are also other elements of the reform, including that the MUP will provide a share of about 9%, but this would be going to be allocated for their insurance, for the higher disability benefits, and later on also there would be it's a defined contribution that at the end of their retirement they'll be able to get it when they retire, the lump sum or in annuity.
Mr. Chairman, I could understand the sensitivity of the issue, and therefore the options and the reforms would be very limited because precisely of the sensitivity of the issue. But I think I am correct that the sensitivity would be limited to those who are already in service, and those who are already retired who are now enjoying the pension plan as presently practiced and structured. Is that a correct assumption, sir? In other words, it is very sensitive in the sense that mahirap namang galawin yung mga mahirap galawin because of the very nature of the subject. Those who are now enjoying this retirement plan structure, tama po ba yun?
That is correct. Yes, Leah.
That is right, Mr. Chairperson and Senator Drilon. And based on the analysis, again po, we see that there would still be significant reduction in terms of the unfunded liability if you're going to cap the salary increase, because in the previous years, we've seen that the average increase in the salary runs to about 10 to 11%.
Would our chairman be open to the proposition that, given what confronts us, that the reforms that we all desire as the ideal set of reforms be applied to the new entrants, meaning the one who are in the service now and who are covered by the retirement plan will maintain with the system will be maintained in the present state, except for the reforms introduced in the House version. But in the new entrance, we can introduce what is really needed as reforms. Pwede ba yun? Can we study that, Mr. Chairman, or was that considered?
Yes, Senator Drilon. Why don't we do it this way? There are several scenarios. Why don't we start with the least sensitive? Kasi
Yes, correct.
purely talagang sensitivity issue ito eh.
Yeah.
So bakit hindi natin pag-aralan isa-isa from the least sensitive issue or scenario to the most sensitive, and we try to eliminate.
Yes.
And since the retirees are well represented here by Vice Admiral Aris de los Reyes, maybe we can get his view, as I believe, it's my personal knowledge that he can very well speak on behalf of the retirees. So can we tackle it or tackle the scenarios one by one, starting from the
Yes.
least sensitive to the most sensitive, and eliminate the more sensitive scenarios?
I assume,
Ang-
Mr. Chairman, it is my submission that what I had proposed would be among the least sensitive, because we maintain, except for what is provided in the House version, we maintain the structure and the setup insofar as present retirees and those in the active service today, except as reformed as contained in the House version. But for the new entrants, then I would like to think there is more elbow room to really come out with for the system that is acceptable given the fiscal situation of our government. That's our suggestion. So that I thought, given the view of the chairman, maybe we can consider that what I had suggested as the least sensitive, unless there are views to the contrary, which I'm willing to listen to, Mr. Chairman.
I agree with you, sir. And we'd like to hear the opinion of the National Treasurer as well as the retired sector on this issue. Let me hear from Vice Admiral Aris de los Reyes. Are you still logged in?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I am Vice Admiral Ariston de los Reyes, retired. And I would like to thank you, the Honorable Chairman of the committee, for having invited me to participate in this hearing today. Earlier, I have submitted various comments, and this was focused on the Senate Bill 1419 by Senator Go. And through the PMAAA, Philippine Military Alumni Association Incorporated, this was submitted to the Senate and also to the lower house. And related to this, I also made a paper. I am not sure if you have come across. It's my comment on the study of the GSIS about the 9.6 trillion as liability of MUP pension. And which this morning, there were modifications or sensitivity analysis using various factors. And I entitled it as my article as fallacy in the outright use of the 9.6 trillion as liability of MUP pension. Because this study outrightly jumped into the need for a self-sufficient funding for, let's say, more than 100 years or somehow perpetual annual source of payment in lieu of the annual appropriation for the present MUP pension, which is non-contributory and indexed to prevailing pay rate. What I feel should have been done first is to make an analysis by the study. Part of the study should have included the annual estimated appropriation that would be that need to be provided based on the present indexation and projected increase in pay of those in the active service, and therefore automatic indexation. Because, Mr. Chairman, because I do not have the complete access of all the data of MUP, I initially used the AFP funding for the pension. In 2017 to 2018, because of the new base pay rate increase pursuant to JR number 1, the pension indexation increased by 73% in 1 year. Well, that is natural because the pay doubled, the base pay doubled. However, Mr. Chairman, after 2018 and projected up to 2023, or the 5-year annual average of 1.6% would be the increase in the AFP appropriation for the pension of the military of 137,000 or so pensioners. So I feel that it is not really unmanageable, and the pension, MUP pension of in the near future would be requiring tremendous funding. And in fact, in that article about the policy and the 9.6 trillion, I discussed that it misled many of those readers in the public because they thought that the 9.6 trillion will be the cost of the pension indexing of the MUP. And for 1 year, if it is allocated for 20 years at 1 year per year, would cost 848 billion pesos. And therefore, many thought that that would be the cost of the pension for the MUP, when in fact, it meant that if you have today 9.6 trillion pesos, and let us say the GSIS will administer the pension system of the MUP, the government will not have any trouble anymore of providing for the annual appropriation for the military and uniform personnel pension. That 9.6 trillion would be sufficient to provide perpetually, Mr. Chairman, not only 10, 20 years, perpetual. And I feel that the figure became so large because the study is saying that give us 9.6 trillion and we will answer for all the MUP pension based on certain assumptions as enumerated in this study. And that will be perpetual. But Mr. Chairman, the actual practice is for the MUP to be granted the pension through annual appropriation. And why not first show? The study should first have a portion there showing that based on their study, the annual appropriation for the MUP would be this or that amount. And as I mentioned, Mr. Chairman, for the AFP alone, the budget for 2021 pension for 137,000 pensioners is 60 billion. And for the entire MUP, it is 135 billion. So even if you multiply that by 20 years to include some indexing and adjustment of wages, it will not result to many trillions. And that is the point that I am explaining to some other retirees and to other senior officers in the active service and in the Department of National Defense. That first, let us have a projection of how much will it really cost annually. First 5 years, as I mentioned, there would only be an annual increase of 1.6% using the AFP data. So yung pong biglang laki, nangyayari lang yun kung biglang taas din ang sweldo. And seemingly, Mr. Chairman, the position now of the ad hoc committee in the lower house must have recognized that just limiting the increase in pay of 5% a year for the next 10 years would somehow be manageable in terms of fund requirements in that period, giving enough time to study and consider and perhaps come up with a subsequent legislation in the future. So I would...
Thank you, Mr.
Yes,
Thank you, Aris.
Chairman.
Any reaction from the National Treasurer on the issue of, well, fallacy, those are 9.62 trillion. Kindly respond. By the way, did you submit also the report, your report or your letter to the committee to the GSIS and National Treasurer who conducted the actuarial study? Kasi this could have been settled between your good self and the GSIS who actually conducted or made the actuarial study.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. After it so happened that I was contacted by Secretary Dominguez through telephone. And sometime on sometime on May 10, 2021, I submitted to him my comment on the Rappler's article on regarding the pension system. And briefly, I told him that the statistics based on the study of GSIS, that 9.6 trillion one-time payment for the perpetual retirement system of the MUP, or 850 billion annual payment for 20 years to the administrator of the fund is misleading. And in fact, some of the retirees already thought that, oh, it
Yes.
was...
So how did the Secretary Dominguez respond to you?
And he said he would contact the National Treasurer so that we would have the discussion on the matter. But unfortunately, I have waited and we did not have that opportunity to meet together.
The last or the latest actuarial study submitted to us is dated September 13. So very
Yes.
recent itong ginawa nila, which was presented earlier, no? And yes, National Treasurer, can you react to Vice Admiral De Los Reyes' reaction to the actual study?
Yes, Mr. Chairperson. Actually, the impetus for us to already recommend the reforms as we have provided in the different proposals is because of what we have been seeing in terms of the significant increases in pension of the military personnel, which is also eating into our budget already. So if I may cite, Mr. Chairperson, and it's not really more on the 9.6 trillion because you understand that is the unfunded liabilities on a net present value over the years. But we're saying that if not attended to and if no reform would be done, we see already that pension as a percentage of PS is already 67% in 2021. Pension as a percentage of MOE is already 165%. Pension as a percentage of capital outlay is already 332%, which of course is also derailing any of the credible defense improvements that the AFP and the other military agencies would like to implement. In 2022, pension as a percentage of PS would be 80%. Pension as a percentage of MOE would be 199%. And pension as a percentage of capital outlay will be 366%. And of course, not to mention, Mr. Chairperson, there would also be the concomitant interest payments that we will have to add because these pensions are also to be funded by our borrowings and could displace some of the more productive spending that we should be doing, particularly at this time of the pandemic. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson.
Thank you. So what is your reaction to the proposal of Senator Drilon to include the new entrants in the sensitivity scenarios? Kasi ngayon, isa na lang yung naiwan yung 5%. So if we include the contribution of the new entrants or the involvement of the new entrants, how would you react to that? Kasi malaki ring bawas yun eh. And as Senator Drilon correctly pointed out, least sensitive ito in terms of the plight of the retirees. Kasi may involved dito yung those who are still in the active service and yung new entrants. First, National Treasurer, and then I'd like to hear also from Vice Admiral De Los Reyes.
Mr. President,
Yes,
Mr.
Senator
Chairman,
Drilon.
just a few lines just to elaborate. From what I understand, we have an ideal scenario, including a retirement which is later than, say, 59 years old or a service retirement. But we can understand that this is a very sensitive issue. But for example, just as an example, if we place the retirement at higher or older than 59, but applied only to the new entrants and no indexation, in other words, what should be an ideal scenario? And apply that to the new entrants. But we do realize the sensitivities insofar as the existing and retired MUPs are concerned. I'm just trying to look for a compromise wherein we can solve this problem or at least start the solution, because presently, as pointed out by the National Treasurer, by next year, 80% of our PS is already on pension. We cannot continue with this. I think we owe it to the armed forces that we should solve this problem, and that is why I am offering a compromise. Let us have the ideal situation for new entrants, and I don't think as long as we don't we just be sensitive to the needs of the present ones, I think we can at least move forward in this reform, because I've been hearing this for years, Mr. Chairman. That's my suggestion.
Yes, National Treasurer or DJSIS or DBM or the Department of Finance representative. Kindly react or respond.
Mr. Chairman, this is Leah again. As Senator Drilon has mentioned, we can look at scenarios that would be less sensitive, but at the same time would also provide a significant impact in terms of the making a dent in terms of the on the contribution of the budget to pension, so that we'll be able to allocate also some portion for our much needed expenditures. Again, we are in this state of pandemic. So there are a lot of spending that would be required and would also allow us to pursue more growth enhancing spending, particularly for health. So maybe that's something that we can work on as long as this would really have an impact on the budget and provide fiscal space for our productive spending. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes. Can we flash again on the screen yung mga scenarios? Just focus on the new entrants from the base scenario ng 5.71, yung 5% increase. Yan. So, new entrants.
Yeah.
Yeah, please. Anong impact, anong effect do sa budgetary requirement if we
Yeah.
include new entrants do sa from the base case scenario of 5.71 involving 5% salary cap increase?
Yeah. The way I understand this, Mr. Chairman, and I would like our National Treasurer to confirm, base one, this is 5.71, these are applicable to our existing pensioners with a 5% cap. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, sir.
Now, numbers 2 to number 7 would apply to the new entrants only, so that the present benefits which the present pensioners enjoy and those who are in the service now will not be affected by this. For example, just as an example, I'm looking at this, no automatic indexation. In other words, in what is being presented, for those who are already pensioners and members, MUPs who are already members who are already pensioners or in the active service, will continue to have an automatic indexation. Yun lang pong bagong papasok, walang automatic indexation. Ganon din po down the line from 2 to 7, these are applicable to the new entrants but will not be applicable to the present pensioners and those in the active service who will have the same setup except probably for a salary cap as recommended. Is that a correct assumption, Leia?
So
Is that a
yung,
correct understanding?
yung pong 2 to 7, bali new entrants lang po mag-a-apply.
Opo. So that is why I'm saying, sir, this will be the least sensitive kasi hindi apektado yung ating existing pensioners, yung ating those in the active service today. I would like to think that this is the least sensitive and we have more elbow room in this kasi future pa ito, sir. Hindi naman ito present. That is why I am submitting this to our armed forces and uniformed personnel if this is something that we can work on, specifically the proposals from 2 to 7.
Mr. Chair, if I may just also reiterate,
Yes.
the assumption here is 5% increase only in salary.
For number one, or for everybody from 1 to 7.
Sir, for everybody, lahat po ng, even for new entrants and the existing personnel, 5% increase in salary lang po, nakakap.
That is why I'm saying, sir, for those new entrants, the cap may not even be needed because, or whatever, I'm sorry, I withdraw that. You can have more flexibility on the cap because you are not causing prejudice to the existing pensioners and those in the active service. That's what I'm saying. We have all the flexibilities to make it bearable and consistent with the need to provide fiscal space for other government expenditures. So that what I'm saying is, for the new entrants, we have complete flexibility, and there we can probably have more elbow room to given our fiscal position in mind.
Ms. Lia, kindly clarify, ano, kasi yung 5.71, merong 5% salary cap, no, salary increase, na cap na 5%. Pag merong automatic indexation, somehow meron ding effect do sa mga retirees, pero very minimal. Yung
Sir,
mga new retirees, hindi ba?
5% din po kasi mag-i-increase
Yes, tama. Pero napaka-minimal, hindi masyadong malaki ang impact do sa pension ng retirees. Kasi kung automatic indexation yung mga new retirees, okay pa rin yun. Wala na siguro, hindi na siguro sabihin natin basis to complain, di ba? But yung 5.71, nandito na nga yung impact do sa new entrants. May epekto na yan because of the salary cap, salary increase cap. Correct?
The cap will apply to everybody, sir.
Yes, yes. Pati yung nasa active service, di ba?
Tama po.
May I ask a question? May I ask a question on Vice Admiral Ariston de los Reyes, Mr. Chairman? Can I ask a question on Vice on
Yes, sir.
retired?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Sir, I assume we are most sensitive insofar as the present retirees and pensioners are concerned, and those who are today in the active service, who are looking forward to a retirement system which they would enjoy and which they look forward to from the time they joined the service. But insofar as the new entrants are concerned, since we are looking at a possible compromise in order to minimize this burden insofar as fiscal space of the government is concerned, I would like to think that the Department of Finance and the legislature would have more elbow room to see what is the most ideal pension set up insofar as new entrants are concerned. Would Vice Admiral De Los Reyes agree with that proposition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your Honor, in my comment, in my written comment submitted earlier, I included that concern. That why is it that MUP pension is only the one in review, under review? Why not all non-contributory pension system be included in the review?
Excuse me, may I cut Mr. Vice
Yes, yes.
Admiral?
I understand
am
where
just
you're coming
talking-
from, Senator Dillon.
Yeah, I am just talking. I'm not talking yet about what it should be for the existing pensioners and those in the active service. I am just talking about what it should be for the new entrants. Yun lang po. Hindi mo na ako makikipagdebate po sa inyo on what it should be for the present retirees and those in the active service. But I assume, given naman the difficulty of our government finances, I assume you would have no objections insofar as new entrants are concerned, because there is no vested right yet insofar as these new entrants are concerned. In other words, when they come into the service, they're conscious that this is the retirement package that they're looking forward to. And there, even if it's long term, we can already impose the reforms that we want to impose. First, setting aside first those in the present service. Would you agree with that, sir?
Thank you,
Would you have
Mr.
problems with that?
Your Honor, I still have some concern on this issue because in the case of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, the non-contributory system of their pension is even provided for and supported by the Constitution, a certain specific provision of the Constitution. And this non-contributory system of the military pension system has been in effect since the 1935 Commonwealth Act number 1 was enacted. Because
Hindi
the...
po.
Aris,
Yes,
let's
Mr.
limit muna our discussion because we're trying to crack our heads. Paano mabalance yung budgetary requirements na talagang lumalaki with the interest or concerns ng mga retirees natin? Baka pwedeng doon muna tayo, wag muna natin haluan ng ibang issues like yung other pensioners in other branches of government. Wag na
Yeah.
muna para hindi tayo, para makatapos tayo dito. Otherwise, hindi matatapos yung discussion natin because manganganak na ibang issue. So let's focus muna in the meantime do sa issue at hand na pag-uusapan natin. Can we do that?
Yes, Mr. Chair. So in that case, I would say that if if it is being considered that the future entrants will contribute to the new military pension system as being contemplated, then I would still say that the military pension system should remain non-contributory even to the new entrants, because the system is provided for and protected by the Constitution and the Commonwealth Act number 1. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Other than this asserted constitutional issue, which we can debate on, and on the contributory nature of the pension fund, the proposal to have at least in the meantime 2 classes of benefits or pension system for the retiree for our armed forces, meaning yung reformed system will be applicable to only to the new entrants. I assume that will not meet as much sensitivity as we now see because it affects the present pensioners. Tama ba yun? Pagtabi mo na, yung constitutionality, ako po'y abogado, pwede tayo magdebate kung yan ay constitutional o hindi. Hindi po ba? But naghahanap lang tayo muna ng solusyon dito sa mabigat na problema hinaharap natin. So, our proposal, let us already craft an acceptable pension system for future entrants to the service. And because that is the least sensitive. That is not the ideal, mind you. That is not the ideal, if you ask me. Because from our finance people, they will say, you know, it will take us probably more than one lifetime before we can reform. But we are just, you know, the legislation is the art of the possible. And that is why I am suggesting that for the chairman to be able to move forward, let us segregate and separate the issues. And to me, since sensitivity is being on the table, is very difficult to resolve. That the sensitivity should would be addressed if the reforms will be made to apply to the new entrants. I think that's a reasonable proposal, Mr. Chairman.
I
Mr.
already
Chair.
said I agree with the minority leader in that regard, Mr.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman and also Your Honor, I just want to mention a probable concern in the future if such would apply to the new entrance of the military, making the pension system contributory. If such will be done, there will be no practical differences between the benefits of the military and the civilian employees of government. And therefore, there could be a possibility in the future that recruitment in the military might have some problem, because why join the military if you can just be part of the bureaucracy and just receive
Well,
similar benefits, because we are covered also. The military is covered by the salary standardization law, and each rank of the military, Mr. Chairman and Your Honor, have equivalent salary grades in the civil service. So yung po lang ang isang possible magiging concern na dapat aralin natin. Ano ba ang magiging implication in the future soldiers who would come in later on and they realize, oh, we have similar benefits as civilian employees.
no.
So yun lang po ang concern tungkol dun sa issue na ito. Baka kasi wala ho yung future soldiers. I am just talking perhaps on behalf of the future soldiers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Your Honor.
I think I have, insofar as future new applicants are concerned, when they come into the service, they know that this is the retirement package. If they are not agreeable to that, then they are complete liberty in not joining the military. Yun lang po ang punto, that they are coming in, I assume, with their eyes wide open that this is the system. If the system is not acceptable to them, then very simple. They have the complete liberty of not joining the military. Kaya sa akin po, this is the most reasonable proposal, and I submit that this is the most practical way by which we can move forward. This is not the most ideal, but this is the only way in my mind when we can move forward. Continue to reform after this, but at least we have done first step. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, yeah. There's nothing wrong with minding the future, but if we think of the future, titingnan din natin yung past, no? Ang naging problema kasi dito, remember, there used to be a retirement separation benefits RSBS. Ano nangyari doon? Di ba nagkaloko-loko yung pondo because of wrong investments? So hindi matatapos yung discussion if we're ganitong proposal ng chair, and this is also, I think, the line being pursued by Senator Drilon. Let's look at the present. Ang present situation is kinakain na ng pension ng MUP yung ating budget. And this will continue if we don't introduce reforms in the pension system. That is why we're discussing this. This is already our 4th or 5th hearing. And hirap na rin yung GSIS at saka yung National Treasurer kasi there are several actuarial studies, several simulations. And they came up with this latest scenario na yung base case scenario na 5.71. Now, can we now, one by one, discuss yung from 2 to 8 scenarios? Para tingnan din natin yung impact versus sensitivity issue. Say, for example, ito, I'm sure the pensioners will not agree to this. No automatic indexation. Without diminution. Ibig sabihin, kung ano yung pension natin ngayon, mag-stay na siya. So, what is the comment? Well, predictably, alam ko na rin yung comment mo rito. So, how about those in the Defense Department, the other MUPs? Can we hear your views on this? Kasi most of you are also retired military and uniformed personnel, I suppose. Yeah, Undersecretary Luna, Ding.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, good morning to everyone. With regards to automatic indexation, and that will be applied to the new entrants, it will not affect the current set of officers and the retirees because this is for the new entrants. So that's
Yes,
I don't see any problem with that, Mr. Chairman.
Applicable to new entrants only. Nakalagay nga
Yes,
dyan.
sir. That's applicable to new entrants only. Because when they enter the military service, they know what they are getting into. And just like the current set of officers now in the active service, they know what they were getting into when they entered the military. That's why they are claiming that they have the vested right for that benefits that they're supposed to receive. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ding. About from the armed process.
Mr. Chairman, may I point out something, Mr. Chairman?
Kindly identify yourself.
Undersecretary Luna again, Mr. Chairman.
You're still there. Sige, okay.
With regards to the study presented earlier, I understand from the study that they projected the strength of the armed forces based on the increase of population. That can be true for those like the police, the jail service, the fire service. They have to increase their strength according to the size of the population. But as far as the armed forces is concerned, we are not population based. We are threat based. Our size is dependent on the threat. So it might even ease up even in the future if we decrease the strength of the armed forces. For example, maybe 5 or 10 years from now, we do not have the insurgency problem anymore. We do not have the separatist problem anymore, and maybe terrorism will decline. So why do we need to have a 150,000 strong armed forces? Because we are threat based. When the threat is gone, we reduced our strength and maybe develop our capability on the technology, and we need less people. Maybe if we do not have the CPP-NPA anymore, we do not have the separatist movement anymore, because our concept of the armed forces is a defense. We are not going to increase our strength because we intend to go somewhere and invade a place. We depend ourselves according to technology, and we need lesser people. So it may even make lesser the pressure on the fiscal requirement of the future pension, Mr. Chairman. So I think the study might have based their projection on the strength of the population, but as I've said, the armed forces is not population based. We are threat based. When the threat is gone, then we reduce our strength. But if the threat increases, let's say there's going to be war, and then we increase the strength of the armed forces enormously, and that might put this up all of these projections to naught. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Undersecretary Luna. DILG.
Good morning,
Yes,
Mr. Chair.
DILG. Yeah.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. We support the statement given by Yusek Luna, and as what he has mentioned, all the unified stand given by the DILG was already sent to your office, Mr. Chair, and with that we submit, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And that's also the position of the entire DILG family, correct? The
Yes, Mr.
JMP,
Chair.
PNP, yeah. Bureau
Yes,
Fire.
Mr. Chair. Yes, Mr. Chair.
Sa DBM, yung sa mga fiscal managers, hindi pa natin na-discuss ano yung impact naman dito sa budget. Assuming that we adopt, say, yung base case scenario, nasa 5.71. Ano yung contribution naman ng national budget dito? Based on combination, contribution and yung subsidy ng national budget.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chair. We actually gave a projection until 2041, but the assumption that we have made there on the annual requirement is based on the existing pension scheme that we have right now and with the automatic indexation. But we also factored in if we're going to have contribution as far as the government share is concerned. So, and we also actually inputted already the if ever we're going to put up the trust fund of the MUP of 500 million annually. We were able to give it actually to GSIS as inputs to the study that they have done. But let me give you some figures. Like for example, for 2022, if we are going to look at the pension requirements based on those assumptions, we have a annual requirement of 138.4 billion, and this will of course increase to 674 billion if we put in the trust fund of 500 million as well as the government share of 38 billion, and that will have an increase of around 5% annually, and it will increase to, for the year 2041, actually it will increase to 825.4 billion. So we actually gave the commutation of that to GSIS, and I don't know if the GSIS can also share that figure, or we can also show the commutation that we did, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, we see it now.
Yes, sir. That's the computation that we did as far as the existing, I mean, the annual projected average requirement for those assumptions. But please note, Mr. Chair, that we still did an assumption of automatic indexation. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Ito ba yung 12-9, yung 21 distributed sa 9 and 12?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I think no, Mr. Chair, the 2022, I guess, is based on the employer share lang po yan. I think we're looking at the 21% contribution na nakapasok, Mr. Chair.
Yes, 21. Pero ano to combination,
Yes,
di ba?
sir. Yes, sir. Yes, Mr. Chair. So 16% po yun na equivalent, Mr. Chair.
Anything else?
We'd like to also give the information, Mr. Chair, that for 2022, using of course, the existing pension scheme that we have, we were able to put in the 2022 NEP an amount of 164 billion, about 164 billion to cover the pension requirements, including the arrears, actually including the pension arrears for all the MUPs. So that's about 164 billion. And in the event that the requirement for, or if the PGF will not be decreased, if that amount will be maintained, the arrears of 31.4 billion for all the MUPs will already be taken care of. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Taken care of dito sa 164. Kasama
Yes,
na
Mr. Chair.
under the NEP. Thank you. This is on the assumption na hindi pa naipasa itong reform bill, pension reform bill.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
As is ito, as is. What if maipasa itong before December break, maipasa itong pension reform bill? Ano mag-i-impact sa national budget?
Mr. Chair, actually, it will have no impact. The 164 billion will stay because it granting that it will only affect the new entrants. But the additional requirement there, Mr. Chair, would be the government share of the 35.8 billion as well as the seed fund, Mr. Chair, of 500 million.
Yes, kasi yung 5% salary cap increase hindi pa rin magiging effective. That's your point.
Yes,
Kaya
Mr.
wala pang
Chair.
effect do sa 2022 budget.
Yes,
But
only the
2023
seed fund, Mr. Chair.
as a seed fund.
Yes, Mr. Chair. And the contributions, of course, Mr. Chair.
Aris, are you still there? Vice Admiral De Los Reyes? Yeah,
Am I-
sige. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, please go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, the projected annual pension requirement for the MUP.
Kindly speak louder or go near the mic. Nearer. Mahina.
Mr. Chair.
We can barely hear you.
Hello? Hello?
Go ahead
Is-
now. Yeah.
Ito yung magandang figure na yun yung hinahanap ko dun sa study ng GSIS. Yung ano ba muna yung annual appropriation requirement projected. So makikita ho natin na sa mga base sa present situation, 116 billion, 127 billion, 2022, etc. So hindi naman ho talaga napakalaking budget requirement ito considering na umaakyat din naman yung total budget ng national government. In the same manner, Mr. Chair, if I may mention, when the budget of the national government was 1 trillion sometime in 2010 or 2011, there was no problem with doubling of the pension of the MUP. Now, the budget of the national government is 5 trillion and so many other programs are being adopted for the economic and social well-being of the country, and that is good. Pero sa isang banda naman po, wag naman i-reduce yung benefits ng MUP, especially yung sa future. Lalo pa kung makikita natin na sa ating katabi, yung mga ibang may retirement system na non-contributory will continue. And then their pension would be indexed to the present rate. Siyempre masakit po sa military yun na chief of staff sa ngayon 2.3 million ng pension a year. Samantalang yung ibang mga justices and social and constitutional commission members umaabot na sa mga 10 million a year because their pension is based on the current base pay, the pay and allowances of their counterpart in the active service. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Points well taken. Napabayaan kasi ito hindi ba? Dapat as early as 2010, na-resolve na ito
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ang punto rito, okay yan kung gustong palitan yung system, pero dapat applicable to all kasi yun, napakabigat na makikita natin na ginaya lang ho yung pension system ng military, ng mga justices and constitutional commission. Later on, yung mga military magko-contribute na yung new entrants, tapos yung mga huwis, yung mga judges, yung mga COMELEC chairman and members, naka-non-contributory, tapos naka-index ang kanilang pension sa pay and allowances nung nasa service. Samantalang sa Amerika o sa United States, na diyan naman ginaya ang karamihan ng system natin, government as well as the AFP, sa buong bureaucracy po ng United States government, ang military lang at Coast Guard ang merong non-contributory system. Lahat sila, mga huwis doon, etc. Nagko-contribute sila ng, para sa kanilang pension in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any more? These new issues?
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
Mr.
please.
Chair, if we may add also in our assumption, aside from putting in automatic indexation, we also actually assume that there will be a 5% salary increase annually starting 2022 onwards. So yun po yung basis nung commutation
Yes.
namin na yan.
Yes, I
Thank you, Mr.
understand.
Chair.
Oh. Naka-input na yon. If we go back to the DBM, can you commit to fund, assuming that we pass this measure, no? Matibay ba yung commitment ng national government, ng DBM, through the DBM, that we can fund or make available the funds required to sustain, not just for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, but to sustain? Of course, we can
Mr.
always
Chair.
borrow, no?
Mr. Chair, we leave it to the DOFs in as much as they are the
Yes, I
raiser of
understand.
the revenues. Thank you, Mr.
Yeah.
Chair.
Sila yung taga-collect, kayo taga-disburse lang.
Yes,
DOF.
Mr. Chair, mas maganda po yung gumagastos. So sila po yung, they can, maybe they can make a stronger commitment on that, Mr.
Yeah.
Chair.
DOF,
Sir, di ba ang power of the purse nasa Congress? Konti lang po kami.
pero wala kaming power to borrow.
Nasa GAA, then we'll have to fund.
Yes, I understand that. But even if we have the power of the purse, so to speak, DOF pa rin yung task to collect revenues. That's why we really need to know from them if they can commit. Of course, there's no choice, But given the scenarios presented, kaya nga ang dami scenarios, hanggang sa bumaba ng bumaba. But then, yun nga, we have to strike a balance between the moral and welfare of the retirees, the pensioners, and the fiscal limitations. Ay natuloy sumagot ng DOF.
Sir, malayo na yung pinanggalingan namin.
Okay, so mahirap. Anyway, all points well taken. Senator Sherwin, you have some questions? Senator Gatchalian? Yeah, Senator Sherwin, I think you're having some connection problems. Dali, re-refresh ka lang. Senator Sherwin.
Yeah. Yes,
Ayan,
Mr. Chairman.
naka-unmute ka na. Please go
Yeah.
ahead.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. We can hear you.
Sorry po, may naputol po ako eh. Mr. Chairman, I just want to ask si Treasurer Leia if my understanding is correct. The proposal is to create a pension fund to include current pensioners. Tama po ba, Director Leia? Treasurer Leia?
So sir, magkakaroon po ng fund. Yung pong fund, basically it's really coming from the government contribution. Kasi po, as we have proposed under the House ad hoc version, 12% would be the share of the national government para po doon sa pension. And it will be managed by the MUP Trust Fund chaired by the Secretary of Finance. At kasama rin po yung mga different heads of the MUP agencies. At the same time po, meron pong initial contribution, marang seed fund na that's also inilagay sa batas and it's an amount ng whatever the government will be able to cover in the meantime given our fiscal position. Yun po yung ma-manage para rin. Pero sir, of course, every year magkakaroon pa rin po tayo ng annual appropriations because that contribution is not enough to cover the existing pension requirements of the MUP agencies. As stated nga po for 2022, it's about 164 billion already.
Yeah. But Treasurer Leia, so both the existing and both the new entrants will be put in one pension.
Yes, sir, and it will be managed, administered by the GSIS. Pero it will be a separate, it will be ring-fenced and it will be a separate bucket that they will manage.
But do we have that the assets and the funds to fund the existing pensioners, because that seems to be the core issue eh. And then when we put that into a pension, I know where it's going, no, to make it sustainable, but the existing pension is the biggest requirement of all, no? That's about 9 trillion in the next few years. So how do we have that? Do we have the assets and the cash to fund the existing through a pension system?
Sir, wala po. So that's why yung sa assets, the military agencies have provided us with a list of their assets, but sadly, wala pong hindi aabot ng trillion mark. So and of course, it would continue to be dependent on the GAA po for the existing pension system.
So in other words, the existing GAA pa rin ang magpopondo.
Definitely
The new ones will be the contribution system.
Well, that's the idea, sir.
So in other words, in the existing, what changed? Wala rin pagbabago.
Wala po, and they still enjoy the indexation.
Correct, but they will be lodged under a pension system. That's the only difference.
Yeah, and yun po. And the pinaka-significant is the 5% cap increase in the salary.
I'll go to that, Treasurer. The 5% cap, we all know that the SSL sometimes goes beyond 5%. Some of the SSL minsan may 10%, minsan may 15%. So how will that affect? No, depending on the rank and depending on the situation. But I've seen SSLs that go beyond 5%. So cap lang siya at 5%?
Yes, annual po. But the SSL, sir, if you remember, and 5% is even higher than our inflation.
I know that. But what if the SSL is beyond 5%?
Sir, di ba yung SSL naman po, kung minsan it's staggered over several years. Hindi naman po, it is distributed by the budget also, depending on how much we can afford.
So it doesn't matter how big is the end goal of the SSL. It's the annual salary increase that will be computed.
Yes, sir. And of course, meron pong MUP Trust Fund to ensure that the pension is sustainable and something that the government can afford.
Yeah. I see I see the point of our minority leader on having a dual pension system, one for the existing and one for the new entrants. Para mas malinis yung ganun eh. At least you don't touch the existing, and the new entrants will have contributions. No, but that is subject to discussion also how to make it competitive in terms of recruitment. With that dual pension system, Treasurer Leia, meron siyang landing period. No? Because in existing, what we want is to somehow land softly at one point. Did we compute how much or how long and how much do we need for that landing?
May I request si SVP George? I think they did some simulation on the inflection point na magpa-crossover na the
Correct.
can already be the one funding.
Kasi the new, if we apply it to the new entrants, obviously we're in effect stopping the bleed. No? We're stopping the bleeding. And that bleeding will take some time to stop, no? But probably a generation, no? But I'm just wondering how long is that bleeding, so to speak, no? And how much are we supposed to allocate to cover those requirements? Do we have that computation?
SVP George?
Yes, Senator Gatchalian, if you can show the slide, if you'll be allowed to show the slide that was shown earlier on new entrants.
Okay.
Joni, please show it the new entrant slide. So here, Mr. Senator Gatchalian, you can see here po dito sa base case or sa scenario 8, if there's a 21% contribution ho, by existing and new entrants, the liability will now be 2.69. But this 2.69, it's still an unfunded one, even if there's a 21% contribution. So on the rightmost columns, you see here amortization of 20, 30, and 40, whereby there are amortization schedule also to fill up the 2.69. So if you look at 40 years, there's about 200 billion amortization for 40 years. But this could be contributed annually for 40 years, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, Senator, I think you're on mute, sir.
Now? Can you hear me now?
You can be heard now.
Sorry, sorry, Mr. Chair. I was saying lang, what if there are the proposal of having a dual pension system, one for the existing and then one for the new entrants. So for the existing, syempre mauubos rin yung existing at one point. How long is that period? So that we can, at one point, we will just go with the new system. Because I am also under this. I'm also have this position that the existing should be maintained, no? Because that's the promise that government gave them. No? So it's very difficult to touch that already. So I'm just wondering lang, based on your computation, if we let the existing go on, how long is that period until we exhaust the existing system, and how much do we need to exhaust that existing system?
Senator, if I may be clarified, by existing, do you mean, sir, existing?
The current pensioners.
Sir, may I ask, how about the current active?
Yes, current active and the current pensioners.
Sir, if that's the case, sir, it will be probably many decades, sir. Because
how what is that many decades?
Sir, if there's sir, I think probably 8 to 9 decades. Just because if a new an active member right now is 20 years old,
Mm.
he will retire, let's say he reaches mandatory retirement at 56. That's already 36 years. But he could live on until, let's say, 80, 90. So essentially, if you want to be sure that he really exits, so probably, sir, 8 to 9 decades.
So 8 to 9 decades to exhaust the current pension system right now.
Without new entrants, sir. Yes, sir.
Without new entrants. And then obviously it will gradually go down over time.
Opo.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Very interesting point, ah. So, yung proposal ni Senator Drilon, as mentioned by Senator Gatchalian, how viable is that, or anong advantage nun over maintaining only one pension fund for both? Mas complicated ba or ma-simplify? Kasi since yung existing pensioners will not contribute anymore, hindi ba? Ang magko-contribute lang doon sa pension fund, yung mga active members or new entrants, for that matter. Kaya nga 8 to 9 decades yung computation kung kailan mag-intersect o maging self-sustaining. So, SBP, George?
Mr. Chair,
Enlighten us some more.
sir, my connection is a bit choppy. If I can request for the question again, sir.
Yung two pension fund, yung dalawang systems, one for existing pensioners and one for new entrants or yung mga nasa active service, no? Hindi naman pwedeng i-commingle yan, hindi ba? Dahil hindi pwedeng pakialaman ng existing pensioners yung contribution ng mga nasa service. So the national government will continue contributing to that pension fund for the needs of the existing pensioners, di ba?
Yes, sir. By this, sir, I am assuming that only new entrants are allowed to contribute.
Yes, that is correct. So, until such time na ma-ripen na yung contribution ng yung new entrants, no, which you said, mga 8 to 9 decades, bago maging self-sustaining na. Wala nang pakialam yung national government para mag-contribute. Is that understanding is that a correct understanding?
Clarify ko po, Mr. Chair. For under the proposal, there will be one fund for pensioners and current existing active members. So in that regard, if they're separate from new entrants, because new entrants are the only ones to contribute, the existing ones, the current pensioners and active members, yung pupunduhan po sila mga 8 to 9 decades pa po kasi let's say may 20-year-old po na kakapasok lang sa service. Yun po yung nabanggit po namin 8 to 9 decades. Yung new entrants naman po, kung sila lang po yung pupunduhan, mabilis naman po maging self-sustaining yun, Mr. Chair. Kasi kung ang pupondohan lang nila yung sarili nila at 21%, mas madaling masustain po yun kung is nakaseparate po.
At the pensionable age of 56, di ba? Yun ang kasama sa ating proposal.
Opo, sir. Kung hahatiin po natin, kung i-split po natin yung pondo sa dalawa.
56 minus 21 kasi yung entry point, yung age 21 for officers and for enlisted personnel 18 years old. So doon tayo magko-compute. Assuming that we adopt the pensionable age of 56 years old.
Opo, sir.
Magulo. Yung scenario rito under scenario number 8 sa number 8, di ba? For 40 years 209 billion pesos, ito yung yung sa para ma-amortize, ito yung manggagaling sa national government.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Sherwin, you still have some clarificatory questions? Naka-mute ka yata.
Chairman, can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'm just exploring the idea of having that dual pension system, wherein the existing we just let it be for now until it gets exhausted, and then the new one, the new entrance, we apply the new system, provided that it's competitive. No, I heard Admiral Sir earlier that we need to be competitive, or else they will go to the civilian. I think mas clear huwing ganon, because eventually, even though the existing pensioners will be lodged under a pension system type, government will still have to pump in money, because the assets are not sufficient, and then the requirement is too big. In other words, GAA pa rin po papasok, even though the existing pensioners are in a pension-like system. So I think mas malinis so kung we will have a cut-off applying a pension system to the new entrants. No, it's just in my mind that is a cleaner approach to reforming the pension system. But I do agree that we should reform our uniform personnel pension system, dahil po hindi talaga sustainable yung just by GAA. No? It's susceptible also to, of course, politics, because the GAA goes through a process. So it's good to put that into a professionally managed pension system, Mr. Chair.
What has not been inputted, ano? Kasi yung PNP, I understand, has not submitted yung assets. No? Yung disposal ng assets, that could also be a big contribution. No? Dahil minus the PNP, I think the total figure that we have is something like 170 billion. And that corresponds to outright sale, di ba? Kaya kung gusto self-sustaining, it could be a joint venture with the private sector or lease. Wala yan sa scenario natin, ano? Ito, yung Bureau of Corrections, no, Bucor, itong pinakamalaki 152 billion. Magkano total nito? 170 billion. Minus the PNP kasi hindi pa nakasubmit. Look, the PNP has 1,923 yung properties. No? Disposable assets ba ito? Lahat? Yusek Echeverry?
Mr. Chair, may we ask the Philippine? I would refer to the Philippine National Police. I don't have the records here, Mr. Chair.
Yes. Who's representing PNP?
I believe the PNP is present.
Sir, good morning. General Arthur Cabalona, sir.
Go ahead.
Sir, with regard to PNP assets, I believe, sir, we have already communicated the position of the Philippine National Police that we don't have existing assets. The assets that we have are almost 90% are under deed of donation, and that we don't have existing assets that can be utilized or utilized for the seed money as being proposed for our
PNP.
pension.
Your
Yes,
biggest
sir.
asset is kamkrame, no? Of course, it would
Yes, sir.
revert back to the donor once it's no longer utilized as a camp. But you know you can negotiate for a joint venture, so you will have a steady income out of the joint venture. I think the owner would prefer to instead of not getting it back, no, get it back the property. I mean, in a joint venture agreement with the Philippine National Police, and you can actually construct your new headquarters somewhere else, you know, also with the help of the original owner or the donor of the property. Anyway,
Yes.
long shot yan masyado. Wag na muna yan.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Sherwin, meron pa tayo?
No more na, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
So, I guess, yeah, pwede na sigurong i-adjourn nito, and then, kasi exhausted na rin yung actual studies na ginagawa ng GSIS saka ng National Treasurer, ano? Probably we can just constitute a technical working group and maximize the participation of the different stakeholders, ano? So with that, yes, I guess we can adjourn the hearing on the MUP pension reform bills. Thank you very much, and to the participants, maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
From the